I mean, I can only speak personally, but for me, it was an amazing discovery when I realised that you could play through any game in chess history with a chess set and a chessboard. Because of the nature of chess, you can play through the games from the Alekhine Capablanca match of 1927 on your chessboard, and you are effectively there. And if you have the players' annotations as well, you can be inside their heads at the same time.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Let's Talk About Chess podcast. My name is Erik van Reem, and I continue to talk about the Candidates Tournament. In some previous episodes, I talked about this year's event, but in this episode, we will dive into the rich history of the candidates. Because candidates tournaments have always been special, providing memorable moments in chess history with scandals and drama and, of course, brilliant games. And in this episode, I'm happy to talk to Mr. Douglas Griffin from Scotland, who is a chess author, a blogger, a translator, and a great source of historical content, mainly on Twitter. Welcome, Douglas.
Hello, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be part of this series on the candidates events. It's, as you say, it's a huge part of chess history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for being in the show. In the introduction, how would you describe yourself actually in the world of chess? As a translator, mainly a blogger, or you're an author, of course, and I actually came across you and your name on Twitter mainly because you post some also fantastic historical pictures. Can you tell me something where you see yourself in history of chess? Well, not in the history of chess or in the chess world nowadays.
Where my part in chess, obviously I began playing a long time ago. When I was about 12, I played my first tournament. So I was born in 1967. So 1979 through to the early 90s, I spent most of my time playing. Unlike most people who play and study the game, you gradually develop some insights into who your favourite players are, what the great tournaments were, your favourite games, etc. And it kind of developed into a fascination in particular with the history of chess. Mm-hmm. So I would say that where I see myself is probably more of a translator than a historian, because I think historians, I wouldn't really compare myself with some historians the likes of Sergei Voronkov in Russia, for example. The people who go into the primary sources and recover information really that was completely lost. What I've tended to do more is just chess magazines and material that I think people who are unable to speak Russian or read Russian would benefit from reading. So mainly I think as a translator and bringing some of the rich chess heritage from the former Soviet Union into the English-speaking world. So it's mainly as a translator and a little bit of writing and a little bit of history work, but so far anyway.
Okay, yeah, that's good to see. I just have a book here in my hand about the match of the century, USSR versus the world, the 50th anniversary edition, which is a great book, which was released last year. And I see that you're on the editorial board, and you did also some translation work for that book. Can you tell me something about that work? About that
delighted
book?
To. I actually approached Chess Informant. I could see that the 50th anniversary of that great event was coming up, and so I got in touch with Chess Informant, who I already knew through other ways, social media, etc., and said the original book is quite a thin one. It really only deals with the games of the match. It doesn't have a lot else. And I was aware that in the Soviet magazines such as 64 and Chess in the USSR, there was a lot more information. So the idea was basically to expand on the original book. I mean, in the original book, you've got the games of the match with notes in English by the rest of the world team and in Russian by the Soviet team. So the idea was we would reproduce that with the Russian annotations translated into English, but we would also put a lot more match. So basically my job there was to pull together a lot of interviews with before and after the match, recollections of people who were involved in the match, etc., and put it all together. And also I did some player biographies as well. And the final result was that the book was significantly bigger than the original one. But it was a very satisfying project, and I'm pleased to hear from Chess Informant that it's been quite popular. So that's gratifying as well. So, a great event, and doing the work on it, you could really see just what a major event it was. Not just in chess. I mean, in terms of the effect it had, it was widely reported in the Soviet press, not just the chess press, and also the scene that the book sets at the beginning when it's in the centre of Belgrade, where they had a massive demonstration board outside the tournament hall, which was lit up because there was more people wanted to be there than could get tickets. And they even dimmed the lights in the surrounding square so that people could see the demonstration board better. Of course, chess was incredibly popular in Yugoslavia, but really it was a glimpse into a different era of chess. So many things have changed, obviously. So it was a very satisfying project.
Yeah, I also have the original book, and I think it's a bit, isn't it a bit odd that the annotations are in Russian and in English? They're mixed up in one book.
It is, yeah. I guess they could have translated the Russian stuff then. I never really understood why they didn't. So at least now, people can do that. They can. The Soviet team were saying, but I think it's always really interesting in chess books when you have the annotations by both players next to each other, because as you can see from the games in that book, sometimes opinions on the way that the way the game was going, they can diverge quite significantly. And I think nowadays, obviously, people rely on engines a lot more. Well, they didn't exist then. And I think today you probably get less divergence in opinion as to the way a game's going, because ultimately there's an arbiter. There's the engine that says, no, white's better here or black's better. But back then, you had the Spassky versus Larsen games, for example, and both players were quite happy with their position. And it's interesting to do that. There are other books out there that have that in them, and we'll maybe come on to speak about books later, but I think it's an interesting feature of that book in particular that you can see how both players thought the game was going. And it's also the case that the annotations were done fairly soon after the game's finished, so you get the feelings that the players had during the game. And I think for me that's always an important thing. It's almost more important for me than knowing the truth, if you like, is I want to know what the players thought when the game was going on. These are some of the greatest players I've ever played. What did they think about that position as it was on the board in front of them? To me, that's a really interesting thing. So it's one of the good things is to get, for me, annotations that were written soon after a game are often more interesting than ones that one looks back at the end of their career, especially now with the benefit of engines and everything, where their opinions might change quite a bit. So.
Yeah, the question, of course, comes up, what is your interest in a Russian language, and when did that start then? And when you did you get interested in Russian history itself, or was it mainly chess history? What that interested you?
A bit of both. I don't know why, but I've always had a fascination with the Russian language, and with I suppose as it then was obviously Russia was the biggest part of the Soviet Union. People use the terms interchangeably, but of course they're not. They shouldn't be. But that country's language from a young age, and it may even be that's why I got interested in chess. I honestly can't remember because obviously when people think Russia or Soviet Union, one of the first things they think of is ballet, and they think of other things, and classical music and things. But chess is one of the things that comes to mind. So it could even be that's what my interest in chess with. But yeah, I've had an interest in the language for a very long time. Even when I was, I think 12 years old, I was already buying Russian chess magazines. I remember my first one was Shakhmatny Bulletin, and I managed to get it at one of the weekend congresses in Scotland. And I knew the alphabet, so the next puzzle was to work out who was playing who, and to play through the games the way you would from a normal tournament bulletin. So it developed from that, and over the years I got better at it. But it's only really in the last probably 10 or 15 years that I've taken the translation work seriously. Before I used to think, well, I can understand enough to know roughly what they're saying. obviously when you're doing translation work, you have to be a lot better than that. So it's only really in the last probably 15 years that I've done it seriously.
Okay. Did you also
I studied Russian at night school, for example.
Okay. That's what I wanted to ask you, because there's some study that somewhere perhaps to be able to translate these.
I did.
These things.
Yeah, I did it at night school for a few years, and basically worked at it. And I think one of the things I did before I ever published anything online, I wouldn't want to have embarrassed myself. So I've got a few books in the Russian language original, and I worked on the translations in them, and then I looked at translations by established translators, where I've got the version of the book, and I compared my work with theirs, and only once I was satisfied that I was effectively saying the same thing and not missing anything out important. I mean, obviously I might have used different words, but as long as I was saying effectively the same thing, I was happy. And I still do that. If I have got a translation, and if I'm working on something for my own interest, and I also have the English book somewhere with a translation of the game, I'll still sometimes cross-check just to see if it's a phrase I haven't come across before. Of course, there are online resources now as well, and they're particularly useful when you get literary quotations. You sometimes get certain authors are prone to using phrases that would be as common to an English-speaking reader as something from Shakespeare or whatever, and unless you really have studied Russian at university or something, you're just not going to know what those mean. So that's where online resources can actually help as well. But these days, I can generally manage to do translations fairly quickly and fairly easily, a lot quicker than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago.
Okay. So. And it's
a fascinating thing to do.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And it is very helpful for a lot of chess players to see that you dig up all these sources, Russian sources, which are unknown in the Western world. And my question is, was it difficult to get these books, let's say in the 80s, for example, Russian chess books or chess magazines? Nowadays you can order online your stuff, and then but in this, let's say, 80s, you did have the internet, or the early 90s. How did you get your Russian books then?
I didn't have so many books, but I had a lot of magazines. I used to subscribe, so I would get the magazines sent to my house. Yeah, in terms of books, they came later. I think I actually began to. I think I remember buying one or two books when I was at tournaments. But a real watershed was in 1994. I went to Hungary I was coaching the Scottish youth squad at the World under all the different age group championships. And at that time, 1994, it was 3 years after the Soviet Union had broken up, and there were a lot of people there from the former Soviet Union with a lot of books that they were selling for next to nothing. And I remember, for example, there's a series of books that are known as the Black Series, because the covers are black, and it's to do. They're effectively biographies of a lot of outstanding chess players. But nearly all of those for next to nothing. And then when I got back home, I thought, these books look really amazing. I could already play through the chess games and understand the notes, no problem. But there was a lot of text in there as well. And I thought, if my Russian was a little bit better, I could maybe learn some things that I don't know. So that was really the first impetus to start studying it properly. It took me a few years to do it, but that's what gave me the idea. And since then, as you say, when the internet began a couple of years after that, really, and then in the early 2000s, that's when I really began to buy a lot of books, and it was through, as you were saying, through the internet. When there's a guy named Kimo Valkisami, I think he's an international master. He runs a bookshop, an antiquarian bookshop online. Bought a lot from Kimo, great service, and one or two other places as well. So it's been relatively easy to get them. I only completed my collection of chess in the USSR relatively recently, though. I think it was a couple of years ago I managed to get the last one from the post-war years. So I've got the complete run from 1946 right through to 1991 on that. So it took a bit of doing, but it's just it's easier than it was, certainly. That's for sure. Although the problem now can be the scarcity. because I think it's easier for everyone. So sometimes it can be quite hard to get hold of books.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Do you consider yourself also a collector of books or of Russian chess books?
Yeah, I've got a big. My wife's getting fed up. She thinks every time I say I'm maybe going to buy a new book, she says, "Where are you going to put it?" So yeah, I've got a lot of books in the house. I've got rid of some of the English translations that I had for them, just to make way, and now that, as I say, I can generally read them in the original. So it's something that I don't think I'll ever stop doing. When new interesting books come out, I think I'll probably buy them, as long as I've got an interest in chess, and I don't see me losing that.
Yeah, so you have a lot of stuff going on about chess history, of course. Do you think why is history, well, in general, is important for people, but why is chess history? Why do you think it's important for chess players nowadays to read something about the old players or some old tournaments in this time where people playing online, one online tournament after the other, and which are easily forgotten, I have to say, but. What is the advantage of having this knowledge about chess history?
Well, I think that there are players who learn the game more or less by computers, and I guess it's possible to do that. In my day, you couldn't really do that. You had to learn by studying the classics. I can only speak personally, but for me, it was an amazing discovery when I realised that you could play through any game in chess history with a chess set and a chessboard. I mean, if you're into other sports, whether it be football or tennis or whatever, you can read about games and matches that took place. You can maybe, if you're lucky, get some grainy old pictures from the television of how the thing actually happened, and you can read about it. But of course, if you, because of the nature of chess, you can play through the games from the Alekhine Capablanca match of 1927 on your chessboard, and you are effectively there. And if you have the players' annotations as well, you can be inside their heads at the same time. So to me, in terms of the chess history, that was an amazing discovery. And that's, I think, really when I got hooked on it. I said, "This is fantastic. You can witness effectively chess history as it was happening." And of course, once you do that and you begin to look at older games, I mean, for me, the next stage was to get interested in the tournaments where they were taking place, and then players. You begin to develop an affinity for some of the players, so you maybe want to learn a little more about them. And then gradually one thing leads to another, and all the pieces come together, and you realise that that it's not so overwhelming as it can seem at first when you get into chess, because it's such a huge subject. But as the years go by and your knowledge gets better, and you begin to piece together the events and the players and everything, it just becomes part of a whole. But I think for me that history is one of the history of chess is one of the things that got me interested in it to the extent that I was, and it still is, and I'm still learning. I still learn things even this week about events in the past that I didn't, events that I thought I knew about, having read a bit about them, and you still pick up things. So again, if you're not, it's not necessary to be a good player these days. You can do it empirically just by trying what works against computers. I think it'd be interesting to hear what strong players have to say on this, but I think a knowledge of the classics, you would think it would help in the development of a young player. I mean, I've seen examples from the past where you had people like Magnus Carlsen who were shown. I think there was one example I saw with Daniel Dubov as well, where they were shown positions from famous games in the past, and they were able to identify them instantly. And I think I would have a reasonable, provided the games were long enough ago, I would be able to probably do that as well. Which just goes to show that it's not enough to make you a strong player, because if it was, I'd be better. But to me, it's just been it's an additional dimension to the game.
Okay. So what would you advise? Of course, last year during the pandemic, I think a lot of players chess became quite very popular last year, not because of the pandemic, because of the Queen's Gambit, the Netflix series. What would you advise people who's just start playing chess and also want to know a little bit about the chess history, where should they start? Because as you said, there's such an enormous amount of information available already. Would you have a particular book or an advice for people to say, well, if you want to know something about chess history, you should start here?
I think you have to start somewhere. I don't think it necessarily matters where. I mean, you could decide to go back to the beginning, to Philidor, or a bit later to Morphy or something like that. But I think what you could do is just pick a player, pick a character in the game. You know, it could be Kasparov or Karpov or anyone, and buy a collection of their games, and then once you've been through all of those and understood them, if there was any players you noticed in it, then pick their games and do that. I mean, that's basically what I did. I mean, my first idol, if you like, was Karpov. And I had a book of Karpov's games when I was, before I'd even played in a tournament. So I knew, I mean, this was about 1979 or thereabouts. All of Karpov's games up until then I knew really well because I had this book, I'd played through them. And then I got interested in other players as my knowledge developed. So I would suggest that for someone new to the game, pick a player, get a collection of their games, and then once you've finished with them, move on to another, and gradually the pieces will come to pieces in the picture. At least that's how it happened for me.
Okay, yeah, that's perhaps a good idea to start with the player. Yeah, as you said, Karpov. May also be, of course, people that you played against or played with in the tournament, because I looked up something in chess history as well, of course, and I noticed that you played the 1985 World Youth Championship in Sharjah with people known other than Ivanchuk and Anand, Vishy Anand, later was world champion later on. That how was that? There's also a bit of part of history. And did you get a special affinity or interest in their games or in their later careers? Did you have? Were you interested in more?
Anand, I had already seen. You're absolutely right. It does. I mean, Anand, I had already seen in London the year before in 1984. Ivanchuk, I now remember I already subscribed to magazines from the Soviet Union, and I had it wasn't a name that I had really noticed before. When I turned up in Sharjah in 1985, I didn't know who the Soviet Union's representative was going to be, and I was expecting Dreyev or Bareyev or someone like that, and then it turns out it's this guy Ivanchuk. Now I now know that he had to get there, he had to win a qualifying tournament. And if you look at the players who were in it, I think it was a 13-round all-play-all tournament, and it included people like Bareyev and Gelfand and people who went on to become extremely strong grandmasters. So he was an enormous talent even then in 1985, but he still wasn't really that well known in the West. So when I came back from Sharjah, I mean, he didn't win the tournament. I think he probably finished in the top 10 or thereabouts, but he was still quite young. It was an under-20 event, and I think he would have been probably 16 or something like that. He played some amazing games in the tournament. I mean, he won a game against Murshed, the Vishy national master, with the black pieces, and that one really sticks in my mind. So when I got back home, I noticed his games beginning to appear in Shakhmatny Bulletin, for example, and then he won the USSR Championship semi-final, the first week in Lvov in 1987, a really strong field. And then the following year, that was when he made his big breakthrough. He won the New York Open in 1988, and then suddenly he was a big name. But I've always, whenever I've seen Ivanchuk's games in particular, it always takes me back to that time in Sharjah. I had a camera with me and taking some photos. It would be good to have souvenirs. But he was a lovely, friendly guy. I remember that. And I got there 2 or 3 days early, and he was already there with his coach, and 1 or 2 other people were. And I remember we went out for a meal on the first night, and I remember him coming and saying goodbye at the end as well. You know, just a nice guy, and obviously one of the greats. You know, he's never won the title, but he is one of the people who, when people talk about chess geniuses, he's one of the people who who springs to mind. And of course, Anand as well. I didn't have the interaction with Anand that I did with Ivanchuk, but what can you say? He's just, again, one of the greats. And it was obvious even in that tournament in 1984 when I saw him. The speed of his play was absolutely incredible. It's as if he was playing a rapid game. Back in the days when it was 40 moves in 2.5 hours, it would take 20-25 minutes for the whole game. And it was the same in Sharjah. And it was obvious. I mean, again, he didn't win the tournament either. It was Dlugi who won the World Junior that year. It was clear that, again, he was still Anand, and it was clear that he would win it one day. And I think within a year or two, himself, and did he actually win it? Or Ivanchuk, certainly, I think he may have won it in '87 in Baguio, did he? I can't remember, but they were, before long they weren't bothering with the World Junior. They were moving on to higher things.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's also great to play
players as well.
It's also great to play with those players in one tournament, I guess. You didn't know at the time that they were. Yeah, it's 84, 85, wasn't it? 85, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in '85, you didn't know that they were going to be. Well, you didn't know they were.
Sure.
Anand was going to become world champion, but you knew he was pretty special. Yeah. But in '84, I went to the tournament in London, the Lloyds Bank Masters, and there was Spassky playing there, for example, and just to be in the same room playing as these people. And I was 17, so it gives you a real lift. It's really inspirational, and obviously, you're not even though you don't play them against them, you're there and you're part of the whole atmosphere. And in fact, that tournament in '84, I played against your previous guest, Leoncio Garcia. So it's a small world.
Leoncio, he was in the previous episode. Yeah, lovely person.
Yeah.
He got stuck in Yekaterinburg.
Yeah.
Last year, yeah. So the listeners should.
I was lucky to get out. By what?
Yeah. The listeners should listen to the previous episodes of this podcast, in which Leoncio Garcia, one of the best and most famous chess journalists in the world, probably tells us something about being in Yekaterinburg, and because of COVID, he was stuck in a hotel room for about 10 days, but he also had to leave Russia then. And it was quite an adventurous episode in his life. It's what he told me.
It was. I really enjoyed the episode. It was good to hear from him. He had some really good observations about chess as well, I have to say. It was very enjoyable.
Yeah, but now that we're talking about the candidates tournaments, of course, candidates tournaments are always something special, isn't it? What do you think? Candidates, because there's a lot at stake, of course. The challenger for the world champion being determined in the candidate tournament. When we go back, when did this start? When did the first candidate tournament start, actually, and why was it organized in this format in the candidate at the time?
Well, the first one was in 1950, and FIDE obviously had a problem when the world champion died in 1946. Aliekin died in Portugal, and he was the reigning world champion. So they had the match tournament in 1948 to decide on who the world champion would be. That was held in the Netherlands and in the Soviet Union, and Botvinnik won that. So then you've got the world champion. So then, rather than have it the way that it was in the old days, where it was basically who could come up with the money, they decided that they needed to have a system in place. And it was actually very stable, because up until 1993, of course, it continued with this idea that every 3 years you would have the world championship match. Obviously, things got a little bit complicated towards the end with Karpov and Kasparov having these limitless matches. But basically, for a long time, for several decades, you had this cycle of world championship match every 3 years. And to determine who played in the world championship match, you had the candidates. But before the candidates, you had the interzonal tournament. And then laterally, you even had a zonal tournament. So people would have to qualify from a zonal, a local zonal. So there would be a West, East European zonal, South American zonal, and North American zonal, etc. The Soviet Union had its own zonal. Mm-hmm. You qualified from that to the interzonal tournament, and latterly there was several interzonal tournaments, but in the early days it was one interzonal, and the top people from it qualified for the candidates, and the winner of the candidates qualified for the World Championship. So very systematic, but incredibly grueling. When you look at all the hurdles that people had to get through just to get to play the World Championship. But it meant that whoever got there certainly earned the right to the match. But of course, nowadays they talk about people qualifying on rating for the candidates, and how some of the games they may have played to get that rating might be quite a long time ago. But back then, you could be talking 3 years between the first game that you played in on the way to the World Championship match. But yeah, the first one was in Budapest in 1950. Yeah. And it's quite interesting I had thought at one time that it was pretty well defined who would play, but there was quite a bit at times of negotiation, if you like, and lobbying to get people into the events, and sometimes circumstances just simply prevented players from taking part. For Budapest in 1950, the initial idea was that you would have, as I mentioned earlier on, you had the interzonal tournament that took place in Sweden, and that was in 1948. So the idea is that the top 5 from that would go through to the candidate. And then you would have the 4 players who played in the match tournament in 1948 for the World Championship, the ones who, apart from Botvinnik, of course, because he won it, but the other 4 players would go to Budapest. And then you would have Reuben Fine, the American. Yeah. But it didn't turn out that way, because apparently Uwe couldn't get time off work. He was a teacher. And the American State Department, they wouldn't give a visa to Fine and Rajewski. So suddenly they have a problem because they don't have enough players to make up the tournament. So then they said, right, we'll invite some more players from the interzonal. So they suddenly found out they'd qualified. But then Bondarevsky, one of the Russian players, one of the Soviet players, he withdrew. So then they had to disinvite one of the players. I think it was Trifunovic. So finally they ended up with a lineup, but it was quite different from the one that they had originally envisaged having. But it was a 10-player round, all play all, and it lasted about 5 weeks. So, I mean, again, these days, the World Championship takes, 2.5, 3 weeks? Those days, the candidates tournament, the first one, lasted 5 weeks. And it was quite a dramatic one. And it was won by 2 players, by Bronstein and Boleslavsky. And everyone knows that Bronstein nearly won the World Championship in 1951, but he very nearly didn't get to the match, because it was in the last round in Budapest. He was a half point behind Boleslavsky, and Boleslavsky had the white pieces and agreed a quick draw, and Bronstein had to defeat Keres, and he did in a brilliant game, with a beautiful finish. So he then tied with Boleslavsky, and again there was none of this rapid playoff and blitz and Armageddon. They said no. And the way they did it in those days was they had a match in Moscow, and that match lasted a month as well. Wow. So it was 12. It was like as long as a World Championship. They had a 12-game match, and it wasn't a 12 sudden death. They won, I think, in the 14th game. So then he went through to play Botvinnik, but it could easily have been a Boleslavsky-Botvinnik World Championship match in 1950. So that was the first one, and then of course you had them every 3 years after that.
Yeah, and Boleslavsky is quite interesting, of course, because
was the next one.
Yeah, Boleslavsky is of course an interesting player. I think he's a bit of a forgotten player, I would say, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But he was one of the favorite players of Bobby Fischer, for example.
Yeah. You can see influences in Fischer's opening repertoire. Boleslavsky, there was a book of his selected games, and I there was on one of the other podcasts by Ben Johnson, Frank Brady, who was Fischer's biographer. I actually submitted a question about that, and it turns out that Fischer, as a young boy, did have that book of Boleslavsky's selected games that was printed in, I think, 1957. It took a lot longer than that before it came out in English translation, but you look at the openings that Boleslavsky played the King's Indian with black and the Spanish with white, and some of the systems he played against the Caro-Can with white and the Sicilian with white, all went into Fischer's repertoire. But I agree, he's a forgotten player, and he made an enormous contribution to opening theory. But I think he lacked maybe the competitive instinct, and I think that had he got through to Botvinnik in 1951 to play the match instead of Bronstein, I think it would have been a more one-sided affair. Because if you look at his lifetime score against Botvinnik, it wasn't great. I'm not sure he ever even beat him once. Mm-hmm. Whereas Bronstein obviously was a very difficult opponent for Botvinnik just because of his style. But yeah, Boleslavsky's best games. The book was translated into English, but it's pretty rare these days and it's quite. I've got the Russian original and I've translated the games. I did it myself for my own interest a few years ago. But I have often wondered if someone might want to reprint it because it should be better. Some amazing games. And he played some great games in that Budapest Candidates tournament.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, I see that there are lately some more and more books are released or are published from more or less forgotten players a bit, don't you think? Especially by Elk and Ruby, they publish some great stuff. Yeah, and
they're doing a lot at the moment.
Yeah, and also Boleslavsky.
Well, it's an idea that Boleslavsky would be a prime example, and I think Quality Chess as well. They reprinted one about Geller recently. So I mean, Geller, not forgotten, but not one of the world champions or whatever. I think there'll always be a market for games by these players because they have played such a fundamental part in the way that the game went. I think one of my projects that I'm working on intermittently is to produce a book on some of these players from the early days of in the Soviet Union that people are maybe not so well aware of. That people like, for example, Rouser. Everyone has heard of the opening, the variation in the Sicilian, but what about the player Rouser? Or Alatortsev, another one. Again, who played he was seen as a rival to Botvinnik in the 1930s. Or Konstantin Opolsky. And he was Bronstein's original trainer. People like that who played some great games. Today, they would unquestionably have been grandmasters. Never really got the profile because they were chess players in such a powerful chess-playing country. Never really played international events. But I still think they've left a legacy of games that's worth bringing to a wider audience. So it's a long-term project I've got, and I've discussed it with my friends at Quality Chess that hopefully bring out a book in a year or two. Okay. Which will include games by these sort of players, and hopefully, they won't be such a mystery anymore. Okay. With some biographical information on them as well.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. So, anyway. Sounds interesting, yeah. Because nowadays, you don't have... Well, you have, as I said, some books by Elk and Ruby about publishing books about chess history and also some others. You said Quality Chess. When we go to the 1953 tournament, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the book by Bronstein, right? One of the best chess books ever. Or at least one of the best tournament books ever written.
Yes.
Isn't it? What do you think?
I would say one of the best books, and I think it's one that what their favourite book is. It's amazing how many of them mention that one. Yeah. One of the things, though, again, the tournament was, I think, the longest of all of the candidates events. I think it was 28 rounds, and I think other ones were 28 rounds, but in terms of the duration of that event, it lasted, I think, over 2 months or thereabouts, and it cost the and FIDE a lot of money. I think they were. I think I saw the figure of 100,000 Swiss francs. Mm-hmm. Now I don't know what that is in today's money, but it sounds like a lot. As for the book, it now seems to be clear that Bronstein didn't write most of it. That's one of the surprising things that's come to light. He had a guy who looked after him. I was kind of a mentor and a protector, if you like. in the Soviet Union, and the guy was called Boris Weinstein, who was he was in the NKVD, the forerunner of the KGB, and he was a chess player. But according to what Bronstein said in the book, he's quoted by Jenna Sosonko as saying that the entire narrative part in the book was actually written by Weinstein, but Bronstein did the chess analysis. Then that by and Polsky, but the narrative part, which is the bit that everyone really enjoys because it's quite a descriptive book, it seems, if you believe what Bronstein said towards the end of his life, that it wasn't actually his work. So it's, for such a well-known book, it's quite a surprising fact.
Yes, absolutely.
I met Bronstein in 1992. He was in, and he was in Scotland, and I got him to. I actually got a signed copy of the book. I didn't know that at the time. Whether I would have been brave enough to ask him, I doubt. Anyway, but yeah, it's probably one of the most famous books ever written, and there does seem to be this ambiguity over who wrote it. But yeah, a wonderful book, and it was a fantastic tournament. You know, when you look at the lineup of players who were in it, what a wonderful event. So many great names. I think as well that something to point out, the candidates was a really big thing in those days, because by getting to the candidates tournament, you got the Grandmaster title. Now these days, Grandmaster title is not what it was, obviously, but back then being in the Grand title meant you were one of the world's elite. So if you read the memoirs of people like Averbach managed to qualify for the candidates tournament, for the interzonal. He then had to qualify for the candidates tournament, and he very nearly didn't. He went through some real tough times in the last few games. He had to draw a very difficult position at the end, and by drawing that game, he qualified for the candidates and got the Grandmaster title, and that really put his career on a totally different trajectory. Had he not drawn that final game, he wouldn't have had the opportunities to travel that people. He probably would have got it eventually, but it could have taken an awful long time. So, but just to get to the candidates made you a Grandmaster. And of course, when Fischer qualified for the candidates in 59 from the interzonal in 58, it made him a Grandmaster. So again, just getting there was a major achievement. And that tournament in Zurich in 1953, you had a whole new generation of players coming through. You had Petrosian, you had Taimanov, Geller, Averbach, a whole list of new names coming through, all became Grandmasters when they got to that tournament. So yeah, and a fantastic lineup. And of course, it was Smyslov who won. And I think Rejevsky and Keres and Bronstein were next. But again, Rejevsky, that was quite an achievement by him, because again, if you read the recent books that have been published, there seems to have been possibly a little bit of collusion by the Soviet players, in that they decided to take it a little bit easier against each other and give a hard time to Rejevsky. But he managed to tie for second, even though he was there on his own, whereas the Soviet delegation was big. They didn't just have the players, they had another dozen or more people along their seconds, and probably psychologists and all sorts of other sports psychologists and who knows what, but they had a massive delegation, whereas it was just Rejevsky on his own with his wife and children. So quite an achievement by him. Just shows what a strong player he was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to go a bit faster perhaps through all these, not going through all the tournaments, of course. But
yeah,
one of the most important and well-known candidates tournaments, of course, is also took place in 1962 in Curacao, in the Caribbean. But why was that so special? It was the last one for a very long time that it was played in this format, right? This candidates tournament, and then they changed. The FIDE changed it to matches. Can you tell me a little bit about that tournament and why they changed the format?
Yeah, well, Curacao, 62, you had allegations of collusion there by Fischer. I mean, the tournament was a long one. It was 28 rounds, I think, although I think Tal had to withdraw 3/4 of the way through. Yeah. But there you had Petrosian went through unbeaten, and he drew all of his games with Geller and Keres, who were second and third, or second, third equal. And I think it was felt possibly that by having matches, it avoided the danger of that sort of thing happening. In fact, I had always thought that it was at Fischer's instigation that they changed to matches. But if you look at the history, it was back, I think, in 1958 or 59, it was the Yugoslavs who originally proposed that candidates' matches should happen. And the Soviets initially opposed it, but subsequently they supported it. So when it eventually went through in 1962, it was a joint Soviet-Yugoslav proposal, which is strange because the old system seemed to suit the Soviets quite well. So yeah, after that they went through to matches, and I mean, you can argue which is fairer, which is better. Obviously, the thing about the matches is there's a certain element of the luck of the draw. It depends who you're paired against. Whereas in a tournament, when you have for example, a double or a quadruple all play all, everyone's playing everyone else, and everyone has the same colours and everything else. So you can't say anything other than it was equally hard for everyone. In matches, there is always the possibility that you might have lost had you played a different opponent. So from that point of view, I think tournaments are probably fairer. But then again, you come to the question of matches and tournaments being fundamentally different things. I mean, okay, Petrosian won the candidates in 62, but I don't think he was really the strongest tournament player in the world for most of the 60s even. I mean, he didn't win that many, but he was pretty strong as a match player. And I think sometimes you can have people who are maybe not the strongest tournament players in the world, but are still the world champion. So yeah, in terms of matches, obviously it carried on that way right through until very recently, didn't it? But and there was some great candidates matches as well. Let's not forget,
No, of course.
So they've been a big, you don't have the same. It's not like one event in one place, so you don't have the same excitement in the world. You maybe do once you get to the final, I guess. It's been so long, I can't really remember. But I think personally, I've been more excited by candidates tournaments than I ever was about candidates matches, and I was quite pleased when they reinstated the tradition.
Yeah, they started again, I think in 2013, we say in recent history. I think there was one
in London. Yeah.
In London, okay. But let's go back again. Curaçao there's a wonderful book about that tournament as well by Jan Timman, right? But Curaçao 1962.
Yes.
Is it one of the... Well, I was a bit disappointed that there are not that many books about candidates tournaments. So everybody knows the 1953 one and perhaps 1962 by Timman. But do you know any very good book about, let's say, 59, the Yugoslav tournament?
I do, yeah. There was one even before that. There was one, and mind you, again, we're talking here about ones that have been translated into problem. In 1956, there was a Soviet tournament book written about that candidates tournament. 56 in Amsterdam, yep. It's I think it was edited by Abramov, but there are annotations by many of the players. It's a good book. One that could be, there might even be a market for getting that one out there in English. In 1959, I mean, again, one of the greatest candidates tournaments, Tal at his peak, on the way to winning the title. In 1960, I think it was, they brought out a book, and it's strange because the book was published in Yugoslavia, but it was a joint effort between Rogozin, and it's published in Russian. And I'm not sure if it's been a little voice in my head that says it was maybe translated into English once, but maybe a long time ago and it's out of print or something. But I have both of those tournament books, and they're very good. I think that the trouble with the one in 59 is the annotations are by, as I said, by Gligoric and Rogozin. Gligoric played in the event and therefore he annotated his games, but the other ones are sometimes a little bit sketchy, the notes. Whereas the one in Amsterdam, it's better because more of the games, the players themselves. At least that's my recollection. But you're right, I mean, really the tournaments have been they were such major events that you would have thought that there would have been books written about them.
Yeah.
I've been 56, published a book about it, but it probably just been in Dutch. It's possibly never been translated.
Yeah,
but,
that's what. Yeah,
I think with the matches as well.
That's what I'm saying, because those tournaments, I think these candidates tournament deserve, I think better books and for a broader audience.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
Well, one of the matches that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the matches that happened later on, and it's a convenient moment to announce it, I suppose, that I've translated Taimanov's book about the 1971 match versus Fischer, the one that he lost 6-0. He wrote a book about it, and Quality Chess managed to get the rights for that, and I translated it end of last year. And that should be getting published soon, because it will soon be the 50th anniversary of the match. So, and we had the
that's right, 71, sure.
50th anniversary. Wow. 71. So, so hopefully that will be published for the 50th anniversary at the beginning of June, and you'll get Taimanov's into the match with Fischer. But of course, it was just one match, and generally you don't get books written about 6-game matches very often, because it's not a lot of material. Right. But
wow, that sounds interesting. Of course, it's those books are also being translated by you then in this case. But it is great for chess historians and people who are interested in the history of chess. Let's return a bit to 2013. That's the more recent history there, where we picked up the candidates tournaments again. 2013, London was the first one. Absolutely exciting one of the most exciting tournaments ever, I think, which Carlsen and Kramnik lost in the final round. Maybe you can remember that.
Yeah, I actually got to one of the rounds in that tournament. It was the one where I can't remember which round it was, but Fiddler played a very nice game against Gelfand. It was a draw, but it was a really exciting game. And I think Aronian played Kramnik that day, and I can remember played Ivanchuk. So yes, it was a real experience to be in London and to be there at the candidates. It was, as you say, the final round was really something. Unfortunately for me, I was travelling somewhere the day of the final round, and I didn't have internet connection, and so I missed the excitement. But it was pretty amazing when to find out later that they both lost in the final round, and it could easily have been Kramnik qualifying again. Yeah. But yeah, that was a real. It was like a throwback, wasn't it, that tournament? Because after so many years of not having the candidates, it did feel like, to me, it was a step forward. Candidates tournaments, I think, are the reasons I gave earlier. I think it's fairer, and I think it's an opportunity for chess to really advertise itself, almost in the same way that the World Championship does.
Yeah, it's
that is the big one, obviously. It's a chance that chess gets every year or two.
Yeah. Yeah, the World Championship match, of course, and the most important tournament is then the candidates tournament, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. More than money at stake.
Yeah. Well, we had some more candidates tournaments recently. The candidates tournament, Khanty-Mansiysk, won by Anand. That was quite something.
That was. It was. He was. It was frankly amazing, because I think people had written him off. And I remember at the time of the tournament just thinking how easy he made it look. It was really a phenomenal display. And again, it just underlines what an incredible talent he is to come back after losing the title and then to qualify in such good style.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I think he was unbeaten in the tournament, right? In Khanty-Mansiysk.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. And he was 44 years old at the time. So, I think 44. Yeah.
Which these days it's old, isn't it? I mean, it wouldn't have been if you go back to the Korchnoi, for example. I mean, he was nowhere near his peak really then, but it was a different era. I mean, Korchnoi, he was born in 31. He was he took Karpov all the way in 1978. And in those days, it didn't seem ridiculous. But these days, I think 44 is old. So for Anand to do that, says it all, doesn't it? What a player!
It was amazing, yeah. Amazing. Yeah, we had some more tournaments. 2016 Moscow, when Kayakin won. 2018 Caruana winning a Candidates tournament in Berlin. And now we have this year, 2020, 2021. We started in Yekaterinburg. Then the pandemic came, and I talked about it in earlier podcasts with Leonard Otis, who was taking pictures during the tournament, and Leonzo Garcia, who was in a hotel room in Yekaterinburg. What is your take on it this year? So, do you have any favorites? What do you think? What will happen?
I honestly don't know. I really don't. I mean, I remember last year finding it difficult to really concentrate on the candidates because I was more worried about things beyond chess. You know, it was just such a scary time. I did watch as they were being. So I was obviously supposed to be working, and like most chess players, I'm sitting at home working with one eye on the candidates tournament. But I think that the main thing for me that I remember about it was just I thought Ding Liren might have. And obviously, well, we know what happened. Something wasn't right with his game. So that was the big surprise for me. I mean, now, obviously, we're starting again, and we're not starting from scratch. So Ding Liren is out of it. And I think, obviously, probably people like Nepomniachtchi or Vashy Legrave or Caruana would be the ones I think. Pick any one of those three. I think they're the ones who are likely to get. And I find it very hard to say. I mean, I think a lot depends on how people have coped with not playing classical chess for so long. I mean, obviously there was Norway, I think it's been stop and start, hasn't it? People haven't been able to get into any sort of rhythm. I think whoever gets through, I think they're probably going to struggle against Carlsen. I think Caruana probably would be the most difficult opponent for him. That would be my feeling. But I really don't know. I don't claim any certainty there at all. It's just a guess. I think the main thing is just to get the tournament going again and get the cycle going again and get back to hopefully safely some form of normality. But then that goes for everything, not just chess. But it will be good. See a top tournament again, proper chess as well, not this rapid online that we've all become used to. And I think it will be good as well for people who are relatively new to the game since the pandemic to see this is what chess is about. It's not just about 10, 15-minute games played online. So that'll be good as well, just to remind us all. It's going to take some getting used to, though, isn't it? When you have a game that lasts 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, instead of this all over and done with.
Yeah, that's right.
But no, it's
we'll see.
That's real chess.
That's real. That's what you consider real chess, yeah? Not. Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, I must admit, I'm a bit of a traditionalist in that regard, and I think it's telling that no matter what format, whether they have blitz or rapid or whatever, it still have the same players winning it. So obviously it's not to say that those things are not chess. They are chess, but to me, real chess will always be classical. What we used to just call chess, and what we now call classical chess. For me, these are the games that we'll still be talking about potentially in 50 years' time. I don't think you can say that about many of the games we've seen on rapid and online. I mean, all right, it's good that you get the drama and you get the mistakes and everything, but that's not. People remember short term, but people are not going to be looking back at chess games in 10 years' time just because they had a lot of mistakes in them. I think it's what you want is something permanent, something with lasting value.
Yeah, well, we're talking about lasting. Talking about lasting value, isn't it important? Well, I also like chess books and I like tournament books. Isn't it that something that's missing, like from the 2013 tournament. I don't know if there's a good tournament book made or ever written, because there are so many fantastic also pictures. Yeah, there are fantastic photographers present in 2013 and also in Moscow and in Berlin. But if you want to go through the games, I think you have to find them online or perhaps in the chess magazine, perhaps. But it's not a book where it's all collected and made in a beautiful book that is made for the generations to come. Is that right? What do you think?
It's a good point. And I think it's sadly it's true that today, I mean, players, I suppose they annotate their games maybe for new in chess or 64 in Russia. But how many of today's top players write books? I mean, not many. I mean, I guess maybe they're thinking they'll do it once their playing days are over. But if you look back to the past, I think people managed to combine their chess career with writing. But it's a different game now, I guess, and people, I think, probably have to work harder now than they did before, and maybe don't have the free time. That's possibly why. But you're right, it's something that maybe somebody will do it one day. Maybe, I don't know, Jan Timman or someone might do it the way that he's done it about some of the older candidates. I mean, he's been writing a lot recently. It's good to see. He's been producing some fantastic books.
Yes.
Historical books. But it would be nice if someone would do it. But I think it would need to be someone to have the credibility. It would need to be a strong player to do it. And who that would be, I don't know. Maybe Carlson one day. It would be nice.
Yes, maybe he... okay. But the games, of course, the games annotations. But there's some more about not only the game annotation, but there's more to it. The stories behind the scenes, for example, and also the pictures, and just something that is maybe is a part of chess history. Well, this is recent chess history, but we might lose this part. I think it's somewhere.
And I think
somewhere on the internet, perhaps where you can find it, perhaps, but maybe not, because the websites disappear then, and a lot of information is lost.
Yep. I think tournament books. It's a genre that's sort of disappearing. I recently heard an old podcast that Luboš Kavalik, who died this year, he gave back in 2003, and he wrote a tournament book which is still regarded as being one of the best ever written. It's about the 1975 Vaikanze tournament. And I managed to get a hold of a second-hand copy that I tracked down after listening to that interview with him, because he said that when he wrote a tournament book, he wanted the reader to feel as if they were standing in the tournament hall looking at it. So he didn't just write about the games themselves. He wrote about the players, the comings and goings, who was feeling well, who wasn't feeling well, conversations that happened away from the board, etc. And it's a beautiful book. And it's just really nice to sit down with a book like that and an old-fashioned chess set and a chess board and play back games the way they were in the good old days. But you're right, tournament books, they are disappearing, and it's a shame. I don't know what it would take to bring it back. I think the whole idea of analysing games these days doesn't be there, because I think anyone with Stockfish can sit and see what the mistakes were, but temptation should be so more than just this was a mistake, that was a mistake. And to me, it's I said at the very beginning of this interview, I think to see what the chess players themselves were thinking during the game is really, really interesting, and I think that there should still be a market for that. And while you can see that this was a mistake, what were the players thinking? I was very, very grateful. The book that I produced that I translated with Quality Chess about Levenfish, it was basically a translation of his memoirs. Jacob Agard did a supplement, went through some of the variations that Levenfish had given with the benefit of a modern engine, not to poke holes in them and not to say this was wrong, that was wrong, but to see what the modern engine could teach us about why such a strong player as Levenfish maybe was wrong about some of his assessments. So that was really interesting, because you still retained the old players' thoughts, but with the benefit of an engine, you could see possibly why they thought the way he did, and try to understand why he might have got things wrong. Because I think there is a danger that you can get overkill now with engine analysis. I mean, it's meaningless. I mean, unless, even for grandmasters, unless they could realistically see some of these variations, what's the point? I think it needs to be kept human. You need to keep the human aspect in annotations, I think. Now, obviously, what's accessible to me and what's accessible to a grandmaster are different things, but still, I think we can rely too much on engines. And you see it online as well, don't you, with people commentating on games with the help of engines. They talk about things as if they're completely obvious when they're anything but. Position, you think, oh, this is easily won because Stockfish says plus 2.5. Yeah. But as a chess player with a bit more experience, you look at the board and you think, this doesn't look easy to me. It's not clear. And sometimes you get an assessment that depends on one of the players finding one move, and it could be quite a difficult move. And if they find it, it's won, and if they don't, it's completely unclear. So, again, engine assessments can be a hindrance as well at times, I think. Yep. But yeah, a good old-fashioned tournament book would be nice to see them appearing again.
Yeah, and also, yeah. And as I said, there are also always fantastic photographers around, so you can fill those books with great pictures as well, because as I said, there are Leonard Otis and David Yada from Spain make some great pictures, and there are some others, Alina Lamy. There are many great photographers around, and
it's something
that
have disappeared, huh?
Yeah, they seem to have disappeared. Yeah, maybe there's not a market for it. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field, but well, as someone who is interested also in chess and also a bit in chess history, I think it is important to keep something also for future generations, and
permanent. Yeah,
something permanent. Yeah. Well, anyway,
I would agree. Yeah.
Okay. So we agree. We're born in the same year, so we
do.
We do. Very good.
We're in violent agreement.
I have one more question for you, because we're talking about an hour already, and we have to come to close. I like to ask just the question: if it would be possible to travel with a time machine to one of the classical candidates tournaments, which one would you pick? And why?
Yeah, I think it would probably be this 1959 one, I think, in Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. Tal on the way up must have been quite a sight. And of course you had the young Fischer as well, 16 years old. You had Gligoric and Petrosian as well, and Benko and Keres and Olafsson. I mean, that's quite a lineup. But I think just to see, I did see Tal in 1988, but to see Tal in 1959 would be really something. What an impressive figure he must have cut. And also, of course, the fact that it was in Yugoslavia, which chess was extremely popular there. And I think just being in a country with such a strong chess playing tradition during the candidates event, it would have been a real festival of chess. And of course, it was played in 3 cities as well. The first half was in Bled, and then they went to Zagreb, and then they finished in Belgrade. So I think for all those reasons, I think that must have been an absolutely amazing experience. And there are still some, you can still find online 1 or 2 video clips from the event. The quality is not great, obviously, but yeah, I think for the reasons I gave, I think that would be the one. Although, I'd quite happily go back to any of them. I think if you talk about the matches, I think rather than the tournaments, I think the 1974 Karpov-Korchnoi 24-game match would have really been something as well, just because those two already had such a rivalry. That was began, but they again stood for very different things away from the chessboard as well. And I think for that reason, from the matches, I think it would be that one. But I think if I had to choose one, it would be 1959, I think.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay.
Any of them would do. They're all such amazing events. And this one should be true.
Yeah. And also this year, I think it's going to be an exciting match, and we can follow this tournament at home, so you don't have to travel there. We can thankfully for all the chess people in the world, they chess fans in the world, they can follow the matches live and with cameras.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Engines.
Just how far we've come.
Yeah, and engines and and I read today that Magnus Carlsen is going to do some commentary on the game. So that's quite amazing. How far we've come. Yeah.
When I remember the days when you used to follow the game by teletext, in fact by newspaper the next day, even in 1978. But I remember then teletext and the World Championship matches, and even the candidates. I think I remember following Kasparov-Smyslov in 1984 by teletext. And you get it moves through probably with a delay of 5 or 10 minutes. And of course, no engines. And you're having to work out for yourself what on earth is going on. So, but it was great. And it's still great. It's just great in a different way. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Thank you very much, Douglas, for talking, for your time and talking about chess history and about the candidates tournament. You have lifted some of the secrets and the mystery of candidates tournament. There's always this kind of this mysterious event. It's always so dramatic and so exciting and fantastic. And I hope that we will have a fantastic second half in Yekaterinburg. As I said, thank you very much for your time and talking to us here. And good luck with all your endeavors and your translations. I will put up some links to your blog in the show notes, and so people should visit your blog and also your Twitter account, of course.
Eric, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been good to talk, and I'm a fan of your show, and I hope we have a good candidates tournament, and I hope we have a good match between Carlsen and whoever wins it at the end of the year.
Okay, maybe we should do a world.
Good for chess.
Yeah, maybe we should do a world championship match special then in November, and we can talk again.
Why not? I'd be up for that.
Okay,
yep. I look forward to that.
Okay. Thanks again.
All the very best, Eric.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks very much indeed. Cheers, bye-bye.
Dear listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with chess historian Douglas Griffin. I think he told us some great stories, and I hope that you get a feeling for the importance of candidates tournaments in the history of chess. And maybe this podcast encourages you to pick up a book about chess history. I will put up some links to Douglas' Twitter account and of course to his phenomenal blog, to the candidates website and some other useful links in the show notes. Subscribe to this podcast if you want to hear more conversations with all kinds of people from the world of chess. And if you like the podcast, spread the news, retweet and share it with others, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel if possible. If you have any questions or remarks or any ideas, send me a tweet at Chess Classic or write a mail to talkingchess@gmail.com. My name is Erik van Reem, and I will be back soon with another episode in this Let's Talk About Chess podcast. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep on playing chess. Bye bye.